Hi, I'm Nathan Pierce, and welcome to another episode of REDtalks. I don't have a special guest lined up this week, well, not unless you consider that special guest, Ansible Tower. So I've been looking around at Ansible recently. I wanted to see how it works, how to get started with that, and in fact, that's what was missing: getting started guides. There's some instructions on how to set Ansible up, and then there's some great playbooks that show end results, but nothing in the middle. I was finding it very difficult to get from install up and running to what are all the different working parts, how do their templating system work, etc., etc. So I thought I'd try and save people a lot of time, show all those steps it took me to get from the beginning to a working playbook that deployed a service, that could install iApps, that could check that the service was deployed successfully, etc. So hopefully this episode will be useful to people, save you a lot of the pain that I went through trying to learn all the different parts to get up and running. But yeah, enjoy. Let me know what you think.
Okay, so now that we've switched screens, we'll have a quick look at the environment we're working with today. So I've got my Ansible running on just a CentOS 7. I did an install from the DVD full install distribution. On here, I have installed both Ansible and I've also installed GitLabs, which is the distribution you can use privately outside of github.com. I'll get into why I did that later. There's not really a lot to look at here. It's just running it all in the background. So this is running on 10.128.1.141, my management network. And then the other, I have Big IP 12.1. And this is running also on my management network, 10.128.1.128. So that's all I've got set up for this demonstration. This same process we're going through will work in much more advanced environments with many, many big IPs. It actually behaves the exact same way, and no matter how many pool members you have, it still works the same. So forgive my simplified environment. It's based on how many resources, CPU and RAM, I have running on my MacBook. All of the steps I'm going through are actually documented on GitHub. I've shared all of my playbooks, the configuration files, all of the YAML, everything is out here. So you can follow along by watching this video, or you can actually just read through this guide that I've provided, which even includes how to get things up and running. One big tip that I recommend you look at if you're not already running Ansible and you're not already an Ansible Pro, I had a lot of troubles. When I signed up for an evaluation license, I was provided the Ansible Tower setup. Now, where this puts things and the way it behaves differs from distribution to distribution, and it doesn't necessarily know how to use the underlying Ansible install. So Tower, the web interface that runs on top and uses the underlying Ansible, they're separate. However, once I discovered that there was a bundle which would install both Ansible, the underlying working parts, as well as Ansible Tower in the same location, they're ready to go and they're set up to work with each other straight away. So if you're coming at this very new, I recommend you do a clean install and you use the bundle to get things started, because otherwise you are in for a very steep learning curve looking at the configuration files to get them to work happily. So yeah. Make sure you use the second one, not necessarily the first one. If you've got experts in your organization or you already know a bit about Ansible, maybe you can just put Tower straight on top of your existing environment. So let's get up and running. I'm going to log in to my Ansible Tower install, and I remembered my session from earlier. So I've logged in here. I'm just logged in as an account I created called admin. And this is the default view. Excuse the red fails. This is a frequently changing lab environment, so I'm always testing new things. So there's a couple of things we're going to get up and running to begin with. So first we're going to add an inventory. So this is how we tell it about our big IP. So under inventories, we are just going to go in here. We are going to add, create a new one. You don't have to call it this. However, if you're specifically following the labs I've provided, you probably want to follow the naming standards as well so that you can see how things work together. So we'll call the new inventory big IPs. Let's just check that's what we call them. No, actually we called them my inventory. My bad. That is the name of the inventory, and then within the inventory we are going to add devices. So we'll leave the default organization. We're going to hit save. Under my inventory, we create the group big IPs. They are going to be a manual group. You'll see that you can inherit inventories, which is kind of cool, even using a script. But this is a basic environment. I'm just going to add them in manually. So here's my group is called big IPs. And then within my group, I'm going to add a host. You can actually have subgroups, which is kind of cool. But see at the top here, inventories, my inventory, big IPs, and then let's add a host. And I'm going to put in 10.128.1.128, which is my big IP device. And I'm going to give a description, big IP 1.neatlab, that's my local lab environment, and save that. Now you might have a host file set up or DNS in your environment. I don't, so I'm just going to give it the IP address, which is equally fine. So we hit save, and there we can see the hierarchy inventories. My inventory that we created, in that we created a group called big IPs, and then in that we created the host itself within that group. Now I could just keep adding more and more big IPs, and these playbooks could then work against those big IPs, which could be nice. So that's the first step. We're going to add the inventories. We've done all of this. We've put in 10.128.1, and there it is. Just review that all worked. Optional, add more big IPs. Next step, add some credentials. Now, credentials is interesting. Let's go in here, click credentials, and I'm going to add a new one in. So we're just going to create one straight up under here. There's no groups like we said before. Add credentials, big IP. Now, Ansible, its background is going to be machine type credentials. It likes to SSH to things, and that's where a lot of its heritage comes. So SSHing maybe to a web server and then deploying something, etc. Now, they also support making REST calls, which does not need these credentials, but there is one step in this playbook where it will actually SSH onto the box and execute some commands for me. That is when it will use these credentials. So for mine, not a complicated environment, I'm just going to give it the root username and password. Setting up user accounts, etc. can be covered in a whole different episode. You can tell it to ask at runtime if you don't want to save it in here. But also, there's some information I've provided, if you take a look at this link, all about how Ansible stores and encrypts credentials. So you might want to look at that and be happy with storing them on here anyway. I'm just going to put mine in for this exercise. So we're going to hit save. And there we go. We have our big IP credentials listed in here. So that says big IP. In fact, we said big IPs, but that's okay. What the hell? Let's be consistent. I'm just going to quickly edit that. The list is always at the bottom, and then what you're editing is always at the top pane. So you'll see I can go up here and hit save, and it will just change down the bottom. So now we've created an inventory and we've added some credentials. Now let's import all these playbooks from GitHub. So under this directory, here's all the playbooks that we go through on this exercise. Save you copying and pasting and then SCPing them on the server and all those painful things. This is like my favorite feature actually of Ansible, is that you can bring in a project. So step 3, we're going to go into projects, create a project called My Project. There's a lot of these demo projects you'll see in there. We're not going to use any of those. My Project, again, you can call this what you like. Put it in the default organization. Source control management. Choose your SCM. Let's go to Git. Now this is kind of cool because I can in here tell it that coincidentally is the URL we are actually looking at right now. I can tell it to put these, I'm going to copy that and paste and take a look at these. I recommend if you're just messing around like we are now, you might want to leave them off. This tells it that if it saw them there previously, it's going to wipe them clean. This is every time you do an update, delete everything there. Now, if you've been editing the playbooks, you will lose all those edits. It will just grab the copy straight out of GitHub again. This can be great if you are just messing around and you want to restore back to the Git version that you know is good. That's excellent. Or even update on launch. Every time you run, it will get the copy again out of GitHub. So I was messing around with these and I accidentally left it on, and I made a whole bunch of changes directly on my Ansible box, and I lost those changes. So we're going to leave these off, so it'll only get them when we tell it to manually go fetch. So here we go. We've told it about this. Now here's my project. It's not green. It's never been run. And then go. And it quite literally goes off to GitHub, grabs all of the files that we've asked it to, and brings them down. So when that's running, anytime you set something running, you can go into jobs here. Again, you'll see all of my broken experimental work, my project, and look at this. It's gone off. It's had a look. It's grabbed some files. It's brought them down, and this is the status. So we can look at that more later, how this works and what the output's like. But it was successful. This is what we wanted to know. So I've now brought down all the playbooks onto this particular machine. In fact, let's take a look. At 10.128.141. And I think I actually do explain in here where it puts things. No, maybe in a later step. But we can var lib awx projects, and 14 was the previous demonstration I did. 22 was the one I did just now. So that's kind of cool the way it does that for us. All right, let's move on. And we're going to create our first job template just to check that our Ansible implementation is working. So now that we've gone and brought down those playbooks, let's create this. And we're just going to call this one my test template. Run will leave default. Inventory is a mandatory field. We'll go to my inventory, even though we don't use it for this particular playbook. Project, click on there. My project, that gives me access to all of the playbooks I just downloaded. By clicking that, this list now is populated with all of the things we're going to do in these exercises. We're going to use Hello World because we're just checking it works. Machine credentials, it's not going to use them because this just literally prints out Hello World, but again, it's a mandatory field. Verbosity we'll play with later, but this is kind of cool for when you're testing and working things out. Let's go with normal and save. We'll look at all these other variables and extra variables, etc. at a later date. Now that I've hit save, my test template is at the bottom, and we have the awesome little rocket ship. This is how we execute. So it's automatically taken us to the jobs window. This is our job. The two important panes here are the results on the left and standard out on the right. Pending, so the job got scheduled and was about to execute. However, if you're impatient like me, you're just going to hit refresh because we want to see what the output was instead of waiting. So let's reload this page. Just did an Apple Command R. And look, we have successful. That's always good. And look at this. The task was to print a message. Hello world. Isn't that nice? So we've got our environment up and running. We've executed a playbook. It's gone through the tasks that were in the playbook. The result of the playbook was just to present this. So there we have our initial setup up and running. We've been through these steps. Feel free to take your time and read them a little slower. Now what we're going to do is jump into the big IP subdirectory and go straight into exercise 1. So that's the setup complete. Just to show you what a playbook looks like, here's the Hello World one we did. It's YAML. If you don't know YAML, YAMLlint.com will be your best friend. You can paste your YAML in. In fact, let's just demonstrate that. I'm going to copy, paste, go. Look at that, valid YAML. Isn't that nice? Okay, that's a very useful tool. Right, so next, let's move on. We'll actually take a look at the more detailed big IP exercise. So navigating back to the main repository. If you need to find this at any point, just go straight to github/nps and you'll see F5 Ansible and Ansible Playbooks. Okay, big IP. What we were here for. I've broken this into separate readmes for each section because exercise 1 has 3 parts. So does exercise 4 has a few, and it was getting a little bit long to keep in one document. So we're going to go through each one individually. So exercise 1. We've tested everything. We made sure that our hello world works. So the environment is good. Let's start talking to our big IP. Exercise 1 has first contact. So we're going to go and create a job template, and we're going to call it my template 01, so we know it's for exercise 1. Job templates, add my template 01, job type run, inventory, my inventory. You'll get really good at clicking through these really quickly. My project, and this time though, we're going to go into our big IP subdirectory and then 01 big IP list service templates part 1. Machine credentials, it's all REST in this one, so even though we have to select it, it's not going to use those just yet. And then that's it for this one. Save. So again, I've provided all the steps for you here. We're going to leave the velocity as normal. We can have a look at what that looks like. So I've saved, it's down here, it's not run before, so it's not green. Hit our favorite little rocket ship, off we go. So while that's running, in fact, it's probably already finished, but let's just go and have a look at what it's doing. So in here, this is our playbook. It's YAML, this is what runs in the background. They break it into name and then a name. This is really good for when you're looking through the results. And then the host to talk to, this is why we created a group before an inventory called big IPs. Now we've only got one of them in our inventory, which is 10.128.1.128. Whether you have 1 or 30, it will iterate through the list. So this is really powerful when you're managing a fleet of big IPs. Connection local is why it's not SSHing, because it doesn't need to. We're just using REST. So URI is a built-in core module of Ansible. This is how you access it, and then you provide it some variables. In this case, inventory hostname, because we're iterating through a list, the hostname is changing, whether it's an IP or a hostname. So each time it runs, I'm just using a variable saying whatever the current host is in the list, substitute that in here at the time of execution. So that saves me having to build a separate playbook for every different host and hard setting what that information is. And then we've got username, password, and now this is the important bit. Return content, so we're not just going to throw a transaction out there and ignore it. We actually want the results back. And then we want to take those results and store it in this variable. So it's going to bring those results back, stick it into iApps list, and then process that list. So the next task, named print response, it prints a message, but then here we have a special variable that says, you know what, grab iApps list, the content of such. We're telling that it's JSON. It's come from a JSON response. And then we want to iterate through the items within that payload. So let's go and have a look at how that worked. Failed. What have I done wrong here? It's always good when something fails during a demonstration because then I get to show you how to fix it, which is often even more valuable. 401 basic auth failed. I've done something wrong in my template. You can go back up to templates or you can just hit my template here. So I provided inventory, I provided credentials. Whoops, come on. Now, this is interesting, all part of the exercise. Password. I did build this into the lab on purpose. What happened? Failed. Okay. Big IP has the password, and then this playbook will have failed. Now, my big IP doesn't have the password set as password, which means we have to edit it. So I'm going to show you why we use variables, because this can get quite ugly. So we're going to go into 22. This is the hard way of doing it. We've got our list in here. Go into big IP. And then we're going to use an editor. We have both vi and, well, vi to be correct, and nano. I'm going to use vi. Vi big IP list part 1 dot YAML. And then we can tell it password. Now this isn't really that automated, is it? We are going to work through how to get around that. Now that I've edited this, we can go right ahead and just run that same thing again. Literally just hitting the rocket ship. Off it goes. Let's just do a refresh. It's probably already finished. I was too quick. Give it a moment. Reload again. And look, all green. So in the response, there was a JSON array of items, which is why we specified before that we don't want everything in the JSON payload. We actually picked out just to get me the contents of items. If you left that off of the end of this variable here, it would actually dump the entire JSON payload. So we helped it out a little bit to just get the list, because we're going to use that list later. So for those new to working with REST APIs, a great tip, I do a lot of things with Postman first, because this is just a REST API client, and it's great for working things out before you then start integrating with other systems and introducing extra variables to the equation. So let's go and have a look at the request we just made. In fact, I'm just going to grab this. I can go into Postman here. $1.128. I'm going to add in basic auth for this exercise. Now, this is the full payload. You'll see I just told it to show me the contents of items, which is why we didn't get to see any of this bit on there as well. So it's actually a fairly basic response. There are many more complicated ones, but this is an excellent way of just working out how these transactions work. We can now close Postman, and there we go. The message itself is just the list. I'm going to tap into more detail within there as we move forward. So there's part 1 of this exercise, but we still had that issue of having to go in and manually edit the password here. So let's just fix that problem and be a little more automated in how we do things. So in this one, I'm going to introduce variables. Now, it's important to pay attention at these notes at the top, because I'm saying in the playbook themselves, the variables that are expected by this playbook to work. If you don't give it a username and password variable, when it goes to execute, it will have nothing to substitute in and therefore just fail immediately. So in this one, you're expected to put username and password. In my lab environment, just admin is how we do that. So we've got the instructions in here. For part 1 we already did. We're going to go down to part 2. In fact, I did include the steps of how to actually go in and edit the playbook to get the right password. So we fixed the playbook, we moved on. Part 2, using variables. We need to make sure username and password are included. This explains why they're important and what goes on. And then this is how to do it. So navigate to job templates. We're going to edit the existing job. We're going to change to part 2, which is a new playbook. Now the new playbook, the reason we're doing that, the new playbook is the one I just showed you that has username and password set as variables. So we don't have to manually go in and edit those. However, to use that, we need to now provide those variables. So spelling is important. in this case, username is admin, password is also admin. Now, this is a fun little feature, prompt on launch. Later, we're going to use variables that might change from deployment to deployment. That's really handy because it will come up and ask you, are these the ones you want to send? And it gives you the opportunity to edit those variables. So in this case, we're just going to save them, jump straight in. Excellent. There it is. Let's execute with username and password. So I'm going to let that run. That's what it's going to send into the playbook. So it's going to substitute those playbook 2, part 2 we're in now, into here. Now the other thing going on in this playbook is we're actually adding a new bit of functionality, when. So before we were just printing out the response in iApps list. Now we're saying print out this message only if this condition is met. So it's like an if then. So what we're saying is if it can see that iApp name in the response, so you'll notice this is familiar, but now we're saying if this is in this, then print out the message. And then here, we're doing the same thing but in reverse. We're saying it's a negative versus a positive. We're saying if it's not in there, then print this message. That might seem weird that I'm doing both in the same playbook, but we're going to use them to do specific things later. So let's go back and see how that ran. We'll do a quick refresh and success. That's always good. And it's going through. It found that Ayap, which isn't a surprise, that ships default with the product. But then the not found, it skipped because it didn't match that criteria. Using these positive and negatives is great for controlling the rest of the flow of the playbook. So you'll see those a bit later. At this point, we'll just quickly introduce the verbosity. We're going to run that exact same thing again, except in debug. You know what? We'll show you how to do a prompt on launch as well. Well, we've got a simple one running here. Scroll down. We've saved. Now we can hit execute. So here's the prompt on launch. So this is the bit where I could, maybe I'd leave this blank and it always asks me just before. Could be a useful way to save you from putting passwords into templates. So now we've run that. It shows you the prompt on launch. Now we'll give it a second. Reload. So you'll see verbose gives you quite a bit more data. In fact, this is the entire response to the REST requests, and you'll see the names. F5 sys, F5 Citrix presentation server, F5 XenApp, F5 diameter, and look there, FTP, F5 HTTP. That's the one we told it to find in our when statement. So that's kind of cool. So we're giving it variables now, which is making it a little more clever in the way it does things. Check is in response. It matched here and it told us what to do. Let's step it up a little bit. Next exercise. Done part 1. We've done part 2. Explained how all those things work. Part 3. Let's automate this a little more. It looks like I need to put some more carriage returns into my documentation. I'll do that a little later. What we're going to do now is we're going to pass in what to look for. So we're going to add a variable to the playbook because at the moment it's hard-coded that it's finding f5.http. Well, maybe that's not the iApp we're using. Maybe, and we don't want to have to manually edit the playbook. So I don't want to have to SSH in and use VI every time to update these things. So let's add a new variable in, and now the new name is going to say check. Even the task name is going to use the variable is in the response, and then print it out if it is. So yeah, that really needs some carriage returns. I'll fix that. Okay, let's go and take a look. In fact, here's the playbook itself that we're going to edit. You'll see in this one, it says we have a new variable in the comments at the top. So we're going to add this in. And in this case, we're going to tell it to look for something that's not there. So I can show you what a not looks like. So we'll use exactly that. I'll go back into my template 1. We're going to go in, that's loaded up. We're going to add in this new variable. And we're going to hit save. Okay, now I'm going to drop that back down to normal. You've seen how much noise it makes if we don't. And then let's go run. So app services underscore ver is the variable, and that's the name. And we know that template isn't on our big IP. In fact, let's go to the big IP. Continue. Okay, this is the big IP application delivery controller. Look at our iApps templates and go into templates. You'll notice the one we've just asked for is not in this list. In fact, the list is a little bit longer than that. But anyway, it's only the ones that ship with the product. This is a completely vanilla install. If we go in and try and look at all the objects, nothing, it's totally empty. No one has deployed any application services on here either. Clean install just with some VLANs and IP addressing connectivity setup. So let's see how this ran. Now in this example, oops, I forgot to change the template. I updated the variables, but I didn't tell it. We are now on to part 3. Silly me. Okay, save. Execute. Launch. So in this one, it's going to use that variable. But that was a good example that you can put variables in there. They don't affect anything if they're not referenced. However, the other way around, if you don't put a variable in that is expected, it's obviously going to break. So, giving it a moment to run, I'm going to hit refresh, and here we go. This time, check. Now that was a variable that was used. Check that that is in the response. It skipped because it's not there. So therefore, the next option was, if it's not in the response, do something. Right now, we're just printing a message. But that could be to perform an action. That's why we wanted the positive and negative responses here. So, okay, that's exercise 1 wrapped up. We got the names, the dash name. This is where everything appears in the list. And we've had some successful runs there. So, okay, on to the next exercise. Exercise 2. So this is a really simple request. I mean, maybe you use auth tokens instead of passing in the username and password. Some people want that, some people don't. The reason I'm using it is I wanted to show the difference between a post versus a get. We performed a get to get a list of service templates, iApps. Now we're going to perform a post, which requires a JSON body. So it's important to understand how that works because that's a big part of the future playbooks. So let's go to the playbook we're going to use here. So in this one, host, big IP, again, connection local because it's not going to SSH. We're going to use the URI to make a REST call. This all looks familiar. We're calling the REST resource called auth and login. Validate certs, that's because I'm using self-signed certificates, so we don't want them to try and validate my certs. Post, we never specified a method before. Username and password we know about. Now here's the new one, body. This is the JSON body to send. So this is a JSON formatted body. Again, JSON lint is your friend, just like YAML lint that we mentioned. Return content, we are interested in the payload. Now this is the important bit. It's telling it that this is JSON we're sending. So it's going to put the right headers in and various other things. Otherwise it will just say, what is this nonsense, and bath. Grab the results, print them out. We got 2 versions of the printout this time. This is the full output to show you the entire payload. But then I'm showing you here an example of how to pick out a specific object within the payload. So we're just going to grab the auth token. So to use this, again, the instructions are in README 2. We're going to go and create. I've explained each of those variables in here. And commands, we're going to create a new template. Leave template 1 as it is. And start fresh. So, my template 2. My inventory. My project, so we can use the playbooks that we downloaded from GitHub, and now we're on to 2, get auth token. machine credentials. And there we are, off and running. Now, because we've created a new template, there's some things missing. This is why I specified earlier that it's important you know which variables are being expected. That's why I went and put these in for you, just so you know, without having to read through all the YAML, because some of these are like 150, 200, 300 lines long. You don't want to have to try and find all the variables. So it's kind of a courtesy of people start putting these things at the top. Okay, so I'm going to paste these in. They're currently commented out. Now they are not. Okay, and let's run this one. I think I put everything in there. Yeah, auth token. Now we have a brand new one. Click the rocket and go. Wait a few seconds. We'll do a refresh. Oh, too quick. Oh, it's in the middle of running, so notice it's changed from pending to running. I was too fast for it there. I hit it right when it was in the middle of executing the playbook. Ah, there we go. So here's the difference between full output. So this is the entire JSON response, which is everything inside here. And this is why we did the example before, where we're picking out a specific object within that payload. So instead of grabbing all of that, actually, all we really wanted to use token auth was token. Now, if you follow the hierarchy, token, the object, is a resource within this token. So hence why in the naming, to get a hold of the token, we had to reference token, then token. So it'll make sense once you get more familiar with JSON and the way the structuring works, how to get that out. Remember, Postman's your friend. If you can format that same transaction in Postman, then it's easy to translate over. So there we go. That's a post. It's a little bit different. It's not exactly hugely different. But then what happens if you've got more advanced tasks at hand? This is a pretty simple body, but imagine having something that was a few hundred lines. And then you've got characters you need to escape outside of this as well. What do you do in that situation? So that's where we move on to the next exercise, exercise 3. Okay. So in exercise 3, let's we're actually going to deploy a new template to our big IP. This isn't something you probably do every day, but it can be extremely useful because there's a template we use a lot specifically for integrations that isn't on my big IP now, 12.1, but it is very useful for talking to with REST APIs. So this step is gonna grab this template from a source code repository and push it to my big IP and then verify that the installation worked. So this is a useful trick to know. You might not do it a lot, but handy all the same. So now we're on to O3 big IP install Ayap. Once I've got this set up, we'll walk through the playbook itself. Okay, that's everything set up. We need to check if there's any variables that are required by this one. So we've set all this up, and yes, we do have variables required here. Some new ones, in fact. So let's go and take a look at the playbook and see what's required. So we've got username and password. We know about those. App services version we've been using, but in this one we've got 2 new ones we're bringing in, the actual file name and the URL to get it. So here, again, all new common things we've looked at before. Now in this one, we're telling it to go off to get a list of the iApps. Again, familiar transactions, store the list in the response, check if the iApp is there. So we've done everything up to here before already. However, before we were just printing a message, which is the debug command. In this case, we're actually saying fail. That means break out, report an error, and don't go any further. The reason we're doing this is if the Ayap is already on the box and installed, there's no point in us going any further and performing an installation. So fail's a handy command if you want to check a condition and make a decision to not go any further. So this is new. We're hitting fail here and saying don't go any further because we found it in the list. However, if we don't find it in the list and it's not installed, and in our case, that template is definitely not in here. We checked earlier. It's definitely vacant from our list. So then what it's saying is we've got a new one here. We've been using URI, which is a core Ansible module. Another one is called getURL. So URI we use to talk directly to a REST API. URL has a source and destination though. So we're going to say to get it from wherever this variable is, that's the source location. Now this is why I have GitLabs installed on my machine also. So my lab doesn't have access to the internet. Otherwise I would tell it to just go and fetch it from GitHub. So I installed GitLabs locally so I can show you how that works. So you'll see here the example I gave for app services source is actually to a copy running within this repository. Whereas what I'm going to do is substitute this for the location local. So your organization might have its own source code repository, or even just a HTTP server where the templates are sitting on where you manage them, that the Playbook can go and fetch. So this can be handy to be a little dynamic in where you handle your updates and deploy those updates as you go. So it's going to grab that file. It's going to use the source is a HTTP reference, but the destination is going to be var temp. Now, this is the first time we're going to use credentials. I've mentioned that quite a few times. Shell actually drops it out to use SSH. It's going to SSH into my box. It's going to do a TMSH load. That's TMOS shell, the CLI interface. It's going to load the application template, which is stored in var temp, and this is the file to use. Then it's going to do something. We've done this one right at the beginning in exercise 1. It's going to go and get the list of templates again, because now it needs to check that it did work. Now, if it doesn't work and it's not there, then something went wrong with the install. It'll fail and say the installation failed. But if it does find it, then we know that all of the steps before have worked, and it's going to report installation successful. And last, just because we're nice, let's do a cleanup. Now, this is also going to SSH. It's actually going to go jump on the box, and this is something that took a while to find out. So in Ansible, you don't actually tell it to delete. You set an attribute of the file to being absent. That is how it does deletes. I found that one quite amusing. Okay, so let's run through that. We're going to need to specify these variables here. So let's just grab all of these and then go into Ansible Tower for our new job. Now, let's put them all in place. Again, username, password. We're just going to set these admin. Now, the file itself that we're going to grab, I am going to use the one that's stored in this. So the reason I have it separate from version and file, the file itself has this extension that is not present when it's actually installed. It's a bit of extra, so I've separated them out as the variables, the actual file versus how it's referenced in the REST API. The source, now we're not going to use this because my lab doesn't have access to GitHub. So what we're going to do is just quickly log in to, if I put, they both wanted to use port 80, so I had to shift GitLabs to port 81, my user, SuperNetOps. We're going to log in. So this is GitLabs. This is also running on my CentOS server. It could be anywhere though. I just didn't have enough resources for the extra virtual machine. So I am now logged into GitLabs, which is my local Git repository. I'm going to go to the files and look at this. We have our Ayap template. Now this may catch you out if you start using Git. Yes, this is the Ayap. There is a lot of Ayap in here. However, this is rendered within an HTML page. You need to click raw, and this is just the Ayap file itself. So let's grab the URL to the raw file, and we're going to use that for the source that it's going to fetch from. And then the result that it's going to check is this. Now, I think I've remembered everything. Let's see that it looks good. Well, let's just run it and see what happens. Because failing and debugging, that is how we learn. So let's run this playbook. So it's going to log in, it's going to go and query to see if this is already installed. If it is installed, it fails and breaks out. If it's not installed, it's going to go off, grab the iApp from my GitLab's source code repository, and then it's going to do an installation. It's going to SSH to the box, it's going to run a tmsh command to install it, and then upon being successful, it will then go and do a cleanup by removing the file from var tmp. This one has a few extra commands, so we'll give it a little bit longer, and let's just see where it's at now. Successful, it's already finished. So in this case, it went off and it checked, it was not found, therefore it needed to continue and perform the installation. It then went and did the install, it then validated after that the install was successful. Now this is definitely one where it's far more interesting to run with debug mode. So let's go in and run this one again. Full debug. Save. Now this time the conditions will be different because it should see that it was already installed. So it should fail out once it's got the list of the payload and it finds the name, when it finds this in the JSON response. Here we go, so lots more going on now. Here's the response it got back, and look, failed because it was already there, so it's aborting the install. That's what we want to happen. Now let's take a look and refresh our list. And look at that, we suddenly have an iApp that was not there before. So we have all of this configuration ability, fantastic. And we're going to use that iApp now it's been installed. So again, there's no services in there. So we can close out of GitLabs now, and we can close that window because we've got the URL we needed. Excellent. So fail's not always bad. It failed because it met the condition to no longer continue. Now, next exercise. Finish this one. Exercise 4. So it's just got a few different parts to this exercise because we're going to automate more and more as we go. So we're going to take a look at the first part 1 of this. This is how we deploy a layer 4 to 7 service using the service template. So if you're new to service templates, why would we do this? Well, this is really important. If I were to take, I scrolled down when I opened that raw template in GitLabs, it was thousands of commands long. Do we really want to convert all of that into a playbook and then have the job of maintaining and updating that Ayap template forever after and managing the different versions as products and features evolve? I wouldn't want to do that. That would take years to convert that into a playbook and to understand the hierarchy and dependencies and nuances of every object and the way it works. I mean, the schema in the big IP is huge. It's an immensely powerful product. Load balancing is just a feature of a much bigger application delivery, layer 4 to 7 services proxy that we have here. So by using the service template and just telling the template, this is what we call a declarative model, by just telling the template what we want, then that's going to make our lives a lot easier. Then we just have to update the template. The playbook doesn't need to know about modifications having to the template. So the big IP experts can maintain the template, but the deployment teams using Ansible don't need to know what's going on behind the scenes under that template. So we're going to look at a couple of things here. First, let's just take a look at part 1. Part 1, this is what we're going to deploy. We've got a couple more variables here. So username, password, the virtual IP address, and a couple of pool members, some servers that will be load balanced. This is a very basic install. Some common things here: verify that the service doesn't already exist. If someone's already delivered a service with that same name and that same VIP, virtual IP address, we don't want to clobber that and cause problems. So First thing is just check, did we already run this one once before? Maybe we need to specify a new unique name. Then we do the deployment. Now remember in our earlier example, the body was literally just a single long string across here for the post we did to the auth token. Well, now the body is significantly longer. These are all the variables we're going to send to our service template we just installed. And then within that, we've got tables, and then with policies for various things and monitors, and then the pool members. Add in pool members variables. I mean, it's the complexity. And here's the end of that payload. It's a big job. There's a lot of work to do there. So then what we're going to do is check that it actually worked. We'll do an inventory lookup, see that the service was there before we report back successful or failed. So let's look at a couple of things. Now, that body is sent. You'll notice the other one was written in JSON format, whereas this is in YAML. I would not want to have to go through the job. Let's go back to the instructions. Going through that job of writing it all and escaping it. I mean, we had an easy job before when we just did this post. But then let me just show you. This is the JSON version of that post. We want to really understand and manage all the structure and escaping all the right characters to get all of this into a playbook. Definitely not. Two things you can do. Get a team of interns to manually convert them. Or what you can do is copy all of this into a fantastic service. In fact, I'll show you how it works. Let's do a copy. And if we go back to the README, I actually listed here for you. Let's open it in a new window. JSON to YAML. And all I did was go in here, paste it, and hey presto. I can now copy out the YAML version. And because YAML doesn't have all these curly brackets and everything that we've got to worry about, I can just paste that straight in. So let's look at the YAML version that I've already converted earlier. It doesn't have any of these same brackets that we've got to manage and escape so that it won't mess with the functioning of the playbook. So that's really handy. I just put these example data in there to show you. So what I did was I then copied all of this, put that into the playbook, and then, where is it? And here we go, body. And then I've just substituted some of the fields for variables that I can send in at the time of execution. And here are those variables. So let's go ahead and build this one out. So we're going to go create a new job template. Oops, spelling is important. I think we're up to 4. Here's all the steps. We were up to 4. Excellent. Okay, run inventory, same again. Save projects, my project. Exercise 4, part 1, machine credentials, which did get used for the last exercise because it had the SSH, but it won't be using them in this exercise. We're going to keep using debug mode now because we want to see how all these things work. And now we've got our variables that we need. So from the examples, I pull it out of the playbook, username, password. We're going to create a service called my HTTP service. In fact, let's do something unique. Virtual IP address, coincidentally, that is the one I want to use in my lab environment, so we can leave that on. And we got a couple of pool members. In fact, this all works for my environment. So let's just hit save and go. Okay, saved. It's rocket ship time. Now, while that's running, we'll go through and analyze the details of it in a minute. However, there's something important. I mean, we did the conversion. That was easy. It made our lives a lot easier putting it in as a YAML format into the payload. But I don't know if you noticed in there, we had an issue where we had a static amount of pool members. What if I had one server, or 3, or 5, or 10? Now the playbooks themselves, let's go back to the one that we're running right now. The playbook doesn't really have a concept of dynamically generating rows and columns and tables. So in this example, you have to go through the manual process of uncommenting the next one to be able to put a pull member 3 in. Now that's not really automated if I have to manually go and dictate how many of these 3 I need, or 4, or 2, or 1. And if I uncomment this now, if there's no variable being passed through, the whole thing will fail. So how do we handle that? So this example just shows you how to do a deployment. We'll get through the example first. It's been successful, which means I put in the right amount of variables. That's a good start. It went off, it checked. This is verbose, remember. It went and got a list of all the services that were installed to see if my HTTP service 1 already existed. It didn't. There it is, checking if it's installed. False, not found, so therefore we're going to install the service. Continued on. It actually did a deployment. Here's the full output of the result. It went in and it created, and this is the JSON version of the YAML that we sent in. We won't go through all of this. Here are our 2 pull members, which we can't really do a lot with. There's a lot going on here, as you can see, but it was successful. Oops, I didn't mean to hit back just then. Come back. Let's go back to that last tab. There we go. Sorry, accidentally swiped the mouse the wrong way. So it succeeded. It deployed all of this. Keep going, keep going. Then it went and did the verification to make sure that it worked. Yes, it did a lookup of all the deployed services. It was there in the list. Let's go to the big IP and just take a look at the application services list. Now that's kind of cool because the Ayap went and configured all of these objects, and each of these have numerous properties within them, and that does save a fair bit of time. Let's go and click on, there's a lot of settings involved in getting this run. So manually going through this takes time. Doing it using an Ayap means the third-party tools just have to send a single REST call to the Ayap, and it takes care of everything in the background. So it's a great level of abstraction using Ayap, so I highly recommend. Otherwise, if you do it manually, you're only going to have really basic functionality like round-robin load balancing and add pull, remove pull, because you're going to have to manage all of those individual commands. What we just did in a single command, single REST command to do this deployment takes many, many individual REST commands to do the same thing without an Ayap. However, let's go and solve this pull problem. We're stuck with just 2 pulls. We want to do more than that. I'm going to choose. No, they're already in the template. I don't need to copy them. So let's go and look at part 2 of the same exercise. Let's go back. Part 1, all the details are explained here. Part 2, we're going to use what's called an Ansible template. And in an Ansible template, we get to use the Ginger2 formatting, which has the concept of loops. We can mess with the payload while we're building and executing the playbook. Now, this is pretty handy. I'm not going to go through all the data right here now, but I'm just going to show you how it executes and how that works. So the first thing is, let's go down to, before we use part 2, notice that, again, we check if it's already there before we do the deployment. Then we got this simple command, build the JSON payload. It says that there's a template to execute. The source, this is the template, J2, because it's Ginger2. And then the destination's the file to spew out once it's built that template, once it's built the payload for us. This is the key part that is different from this exercise and the one we just did. Because if you look now, the body for the entire thing, instead of those hundreds of lines, it's actually just doing a lookup. It says, go and grab that thing we just ran. And it's YAML. And then it converts it to JSON because at the time that it sends the transaction, it says the format has to be JSON. So these 2 lines here and this one is extremely beneficial. Now let's go and show you what the template looks like. So the template is basically the same Ayap. However, the Ginger2 processing, if we come down here, instead of hard setting the pulls, we've got the % for host in group.webservers, iterate through this list, putting the host in each time, and then end for. That's pretty cool. So now it's actually dynamic in how it's going to handle this. So what I'm going to have to do though, is you'll notice it said for host in groups. And the last time I did this demo, I forgot to put that last step in and specify the group. So we need to make sure in 2, it's going to look up an inventory and try and find a group called web servers. We've got all of this in here. We've got our variables. 1 already exists, so it would fail when it does the lookup. So we're going to just change it quickly. So it's a new virtual IP and service name, which has to be unique. We're going to save those 2. And so that the template works, instead of hitting run now, we're just going to go into inventories. We're going to go into our inventory we created before. This is the one we're using. We're going to add a new group. And this name is important because it needs to match what was in the template. So the name we had was web servers. Save. And now in web servers, we're going to add some hosts. 20.1, save me some typing, I can copy and paste this. We could write web server 1, web server 2, but to speed things along, I'm just going to keep adding more hosts. 2, and we're going to add 1 more host. 3, so now we've got a web server group, so with 3 hosts in it. And that's how we get this template to work. So let's create this. We no longer need to use the IP addresses. We're going to go back to our job template, template 4. We've got it to part 2 already. Inventory, that's how it's going to find the big IP list, but also now the web server list that we want to deploy to. So let's go and run. I think I've done all the steps. We'll soon find out. Give it a moment to execute. While that's doing that, quick review. So deploy, just make sure I did type that right now that it's running. For hosting groups.web_servers. Good, I did get that right. So that should work fine. Let's do a refresh. Fantastic, successful. So, just like before, get the list of services that are deployed. That's what this is. If we go through here, we should be able to find the names of the services. My HTTP service 1 was already there. It's the only one that's been installed on this box. So service 2 was not found, therefore it's safe to go ahead. It goes out and builds the template, which is kind of nifty of it, which results in deploy payload, which never existed before. That got built at the time of execution. It then can use deploy payload to do the deployment. This is that template. So you can see it's all been converted to JSON for the execution. Look at all those commands. You no longer had to type. Pretty nifty. Does the deployment, full output of the response. It worked. Loads of data going on there, which you wouldn't see if debug wasn't on. And then the response, because it was successful. And then it does a lookup and says, okay, now tell me the list of services. So in this time, we shouldn't see just 1. Here we go, we've got 2. My service 1 and my service 2. So my service 2 was found. That means it was successful. So there we go. We've taken a lot of the hard coding out of all of that. Let's go back to our big IP. Let's just do a look. And look, we now have 2 services deployed, but with all those settings that were deemed and ratified by the deployment team saying, look, we've got 3 big IPs in here. And now we've taken all that hard-coded business out. So templates are great. They help you get rid of things that are a variable, that are dynamic, that we don't want hard set, but also using this template, I mean, I've been very basic in what I've specified as a variable. You could actually add a lot more variables in. we don't just have to have service name and virtual IP address. You could then go in and set all sorts. I mean, there's many settings in here. Load balancing algorithm, the monitor to use to determine whether the service is up or down. I've just used the built-in HTTP one. You could have bespoke ones here and specify them via variables. So there's a lot more that could be done. I just wanted to show enough to get you started so that you could see how all of this works. But again, these are all on GitHub. I'll provide a link under the article where you can find them for this video. Hopefully this has been useful. By all means, reach out and provide feedback or ask any questions on how I got around some things. Hopefully I've included everything in there that you need. It's been another episode. Thanks for listening.